Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@usaprepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. And we're broadcasting 2 hours today from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains. Kyle is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota at GCN. I'm Vincent Finelli, and I'm delighted to be broadcasting with George in New Hampshire. And George is a very, very bright guy, very articulate, and he's been a student of USA Prepares for a while. And he would call in, and I liked him so well that I asked him to be an instructor on the air and share his wealth of knowledge and experiences. So today we're going to do just that. It's going to be a lighthearted show, a lighthearted broadcast, and we're going to talk about experiences that we have each had separate from each other. They might dovetail a little bit, and what you'll hear is what it's like when George and I are on the telephone, not on the air with each other, just chatting as two people on the phone might do. So today you're going to learn who is George in New Hampshire by some of the stories we tell, and you'll learn a little bit more about who is Vincent Finelli. So if you stay tuned, you'll learn a little bit more about us. Welcome, George.
Hi, Vincent. Thank you for such a complimentary intro. The check is in the mail.
Well, it's all true. You know, George, I wanted to share something to a small story as we get started with who are we. And I've mentioned that I had a job at three of the largest banks in the country, credit card banks, back in the 1980s. And one of the things that I liked doing was giving my team, the team that developed really, really neat, fun technologies for the bank to make the customer's experience better. I liked being away from the mainstream. So we were in the corporate headquarters of one of these banks. That's where we worked, and had a team of relatively young people with me. And I found in the basement of the bank headquarters there was a exercise room, but it wasn't being used, and all the equipment was gone, and it was carpeted, and it was really, really nice. And near it was around the corner was the men's room, the ladies' room. The elevators were right there, and there was a payphone right outside this exercise room area. So I talked to the senior VP, and I said, hey, I would love to move our team down there. It would give us a little more peace and quiet, and we'd be able to develop the kind of technologies more effectively, I thought. Because I didn't subscribe to the typical office arrangement where each person would have either a cubicle or an office with a closed door. I didn't like that. I wanted a bullpen. I wanted all of our guys and gals to be in a room where they could hear each other, no secrets. And if one person was working on a part of a project that another person needed to know about, and he was on the phone or she was on the phone, they could hear each other, and we didn't have to have a lot of meetings because everybody knew what was going on. So we were down in the basement of this bank building, and what I noticed was there were a lot of guys that would come down to use the men's room. Now, they would come from other floors and across the walkway, the skyway, if you will, to use the basement men's room. And I thought, gosh, they've got their own. What's the problem? And then the payphone right outside our area was being used by people looking for other jobs. And it annoyed me. It annoyed me that we had some traders among us who wanted to leave our banking, apply for jobs at J.P. Morgan and Chase and Citi and, those kind of banks. So being a fan of some practical jokes, I decided that I would kind of embarrass the people applying for jobs and maybe make their row a little tougher to hoe. So I put a sign on the side of the payphone, and the people who would come down to the basement to use the payphone to apply for other jobs, they'd try to be really discreet and quiet, and they'd say, I'm calling about my application. Have you received it, and what is the status, and those kinds of things, during the workday. So I put the sign on the side of the phone. It said, "This phone transmits poorly. Please speak in a loud, clear, distinct voice." And what happened? The people who used the phone didn't want to mess up that phone call. They'd say, "Hi, this is." I have a feeling that they sounded quite mentally deficient when they made those calls, and we got to keep some of our top employees. So they were kind of prevented from leaving by their own voices. And the reason that came to my mind is I was looking on the internet, and there is a sign, and this guy, whoever he was really clever. And he made this sign, and it says Xerox, and it looks like a Xerox logo. And this sign was obviously in some large corporation where they have a really expensive large Xerox machine that would copy and staple and collate and do all the things that these expensive machines would do. And so the sign is 8.5 by 11. It's just taped to the wall, and it's obviously just behind. If you were looking at the copy machine, it'd be just what you would see first. And it's multicolored. It's red and yellow and green and black. It's on a white background. It says, "Xerox. This copier has been upgraded. Linguistic Model 4.01 has been installed. Voice commands have been enabled. State your name for diagnostic purposes only. State the desired function keywords. Allowed keywords are copy, collate, staple, etc. And state the number needed. Then say start." And then it says, this module is in learning mode, and the user may have to repeat the commands until the voice is recognized. Is that brilliant or what?
I guess, this was, of course, just a hoax, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, it was just a hoax.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But I'm just saying is that, well, like I say, is, hey, it's good for the workplace to have some practical jokes once in a while.
Yeah, and I can just see people standing there for the first time saying, "Copy, collate, start." Hey, start. My name is Joe Dokes. Start.
Well, yeah,
I can just see it in the large corporate America work environment. I can see it. And congratulations to that guy who did that. I mean, so he took my little practical joke to the next level, and I think it's absolutely hysterical and brilliant. So good for him. And there's another one, a guy who lives, I mentioned this before, it's a guy who lives next to the Milwaukee, Wisconsin airport. And he has a city property and a large flat roof. And it's black. And so he painted on his roof a sign. Looks like he used a 12-inch roller with white paint on his black roof. And it says, "Welcome to Cleveland." Good for him. I can just imagine the chaos that causes on the airplane. Honey, we're not in Milwaukee. We're landing in Cleveland.
You know what that reminds me of? just out of curiosity, many years ago, you know how if you live adjacent to one of these airports, there's so much noise?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Well, they had this older German gentleman, and the Germans are quite the engineers, and they're quite imaginative, and they can construct things. And he built his own small catapult, and he would load a mix based, I guess, fundamentally on a German dumpling recipe. And what he did was he complained enough times, and he said, basically, that's it. So what he did was he made this gooey concoction, and he'd pick his times, and he'd launch it at one of the planes coming by. No, I'm not recommending this. Well, they settled with him very quickly, and they rerouted. No, but you have to give it to it the ingenuity of those old timers. You know what I mean? They had a problem, they studied it, and they solved it. You know.
Remember when soda cans and beer cans were made out of steel? Remember that?
Yeah.
And you'd use a can opener to open a can of beer. You just, I use this triangular shaped cutout that would be made with a can opener, and you would use the leverage of the small, maybe 4-inch long device against the rim of the can, and it would pop the top so you could drink it. You put a large hole in one side of it, the top, and a small hole in the other. Well, when I was at the university, I had some really, really bright friends, and sometimes you get bored. Well, we in the same line of thinking as the story you just told, we decided to make a cannon out of soda cans and beer cans. And by the way, the drinking age where I was 18, so it wasn't like we were doing anything illegal. But I'm not sure that would matter anyway. But anyway, we would cut out the tops and the bottoms of, let's say, 6 cans. So they would be just cylinders. Except for the last can. We would leave the bottom in, but we'd cut out the top. And we would tape them end to end to end to end with really strong tape, like duct tape. And we'd punch a little tiny hole in the bottom of the last can, kind of near the back of the can, or the bottom of the can. I'll tell you what we did with that when we come back. George and I are talking about just stories that things that we've experienced. Did our announcers say instruction that matters? Well, George, so these cans were taped end to end to end, and the last one had the bottom still in it. And we would take a petroleum distillate, a highly volatile one, just a couple drops, literally a couple drops, and put it in the can and shake the can back and forth and volatilize that petroleum distillate. Then drop a tennis ball in there, and then with a match, that darn thing would launch, a couple 100 feet. And so we had a lot of fun with that. We were learning about physics, and we were learning about trajectories, and and we were just having a lot of fun with this toy that we made. And that's what happens when students have more time on their hands than they should. Now, I'm not advocating that anyone do this. It's darn dangerous because, the wrong distillate, the wrong amount, those cans could split wide open, and you could really, really hurt yourself. So just use this as a lesson that, it happened. Should it happen again? No. Okay? And if you tried it today with the newly improved lightweight cans, you might lose pieces of your body. Don't do it. Yep. So it can't be done today with current manufacturing techniques of soda cans. It absolutely cannot be done. Now, there are other things you can do with soda cans that are pretty cool. You can make an air-to-air heat exchanger and heat your house with it by taking soda cans and punching out the bottoms of them and stacking them one on top of another, and have rows of, let's say, 8 or 10 of them, paint them black, put them behind a glass frame, aim it at the sun, and the solar rays will heat up the black aluminum soda cans, and give off heat. You can have an air vent at the bottom of this. Well, I'll say it's a 4-foot by 8-foot frame, maybe 4 inches deep, and an air hole maybe 4 inches at the top, and you can have heat. You can produce heat with this, and maybe
through, I guess, right? Just as heat rises,
yeah, and it absolutely works. So it's a really good, use for aluminum soda cans, because aluminum conducts heat and cold very, very well. So that's just a thought. Go ahead, George.
Do you mind, Vincent, if I have a joke that I get a lot of mileage on St. Patrick's Day, but it also has a connotation that you'll see at the end with this season we're in. Do you mind?
Sure, go ahead.
I have a friend from Galway, and he brings back the latest Irish jokes, and he told me this one years ago. And what it was outside Dublin town, and I'll put on a little bit, I'm part Irish, so I'll put in a little bit of an Irish accent to it. Well, there was a nun, and she was walking into Dublin town one night, on a foggy night. So a taxi cab driver was driving by, and Sean looks out and he sees the nun on the side of the road walking into town. So he pulls over, he goes, "Sister, where would you be going on a night like tonight?" So she goes, "Well, I'd be going into town." So he says, "Hop in." So they drive off into the night. So Sean's looking in the mirror, and he notices she's kind of youngish, the nun, and she's cute. She's cute to the nose. And he says, "Sister, I have to confess, I've always wanted to kiss a nun once in my life." And now there's a long silence in the back seat. So finally the nun speaks, and she says, "Well, on 2 conditions. 1, you have to be Catholic. And 2, you have to be unmarried." So Sean says, "Sister, it's me lucky night. I'm not married and I'm Catholic." So he pulls over on the side of the road, and he's about to turn around when lickety-split, she leaps into the front seat, and she gives him a big, big kiss on the lips. Well, he's flustered. So she adjusts her habits and calmly gets back in the back seat. And he composes himself, and he drives back off into the night. Well, after a few minutes, Sean's got a kind of sheepish look on his face, and he says, "Sister, I have a confession to make. I lied. I'm not Catholic, and I'm married." So the sister in the back seat, now there's a longer silence in the back seat. So finally the sister says, "Well, confession is good for the soul, and I have one too. My name is Kevin, and I'm going to a Halloween party." I do get a lot of mileage out of
that. It sounds like in today's environment that might be absolutely a true story.
Yeah.
When we come back, I'll tell you a story about my dad and me in the Catholic Church. We'll be right back. Pastor George is with us. George is in New Hampshire. George, I think by the time we're done with today's broadcast, the three students that we have will have jumped ship.
Well, we've eliminated all the sponsors just about. So, thanks to Miles, I'm glad I played my part. I don't want to be able to slack it, that's for sure.
My mom and dad, when we were in Virginia, my mom and dad lived right next door. So the fence that divided their farm from ours to keep the cows from going from one farm to the next, that fence was the property line. And so I spent a lot of time with my mom and dad, and we would go to church together. So our family and my mom and dad, we'd all get in a vehicle, and we'd drive to, the 15 miles or so to the next town where there was a Catholic church. And I'm talking about in the 90s. And the Catholic church was a small Catholic church in rural Virginia. There weren't a lot of Catholics, but there were, the number of parishioners was increasing. So there was a mass at 9 o'clock on Sunday, and there was another mass at 11 o'clock on Sunday. And the priest was saying, it's really packed in here. And so we're going to have to talk about expanding the church. We're going to have to, maybe add on. Now, this was a stone church, and it was really, really well built, really thick walls, maybe 18 inches thick. all stone. And this was going to be an expensive proposition to make the expansion match the existing church, because the church was old. And so a group or a committee was formed to kind of assist with this, to the expansion committee. And they wanted donations from the parishioners, and they weren't little donations. They would start at like $500. Now, this is in addition to whatever you would normally contribute to Mass, your donation at Mass. This would be, in addition to that. So they were looking for $500 as a minimum. $5,000 would be, more desirable. And so we kept getting calls at our house. And my name was exactly the same as my dad's name. And I would say things like, I'm really glad you called, but I think you're looking for my dad. And so they would then call my dad. And then he'd call me back. For weeks they would call me back. And nothing was working. I'd say, okay, well, why don't you send me, I haven't seen any of this information, so why don't you send me this little packet and I'll take a look at it. I'm trying to get out of the $5,000, right? Because I'm thinking, there's an easy way to fix this. We just add one more Mass on Sunday. So instead of a 9 o'clock Mass and 11 o'clock Mass, we just add one more. And that's going to fix the entire problem.
Makes sense.
Sure. But they didn't want to do that. What the church wanted to do was have a bigger church. So kind of like what school superintendents do. They want to build new buildings. Well, I was getting nowhere trying to avoid paying the $500 or whatever it might have been, $5,000. I wasn't going to do it because to me it was not necessary. Okay, so finally, a call came in, and I can't run from these calls anymore. They just keep coming and coming and coming, and I know the guy who's calling me. He's just he's a parishioner in the church, and so I said, well, I guess you didn't know. I guess you haven't heard. We've converted. We're now Buddhists.
Oh, God.
Do you know that worked?
Oh, God.
So, well, George, well,
I would have sent them a picture of a bunch of Buddhists with shaved heads. I would have said, "Thank you very much. We're now, we're now looking for a church."
So our broadcast classroom throughout the world is learning. Maybe they thought Vinny was a little bit more meek and mild than this, and so I've been like this for a long time. That's a story I have not shared on the air, but I thought it was apropos for today's environment. We're talking about practical jokes, and we're talking about things that we've done at work. George, when I had that job at the bank in the basement in the exercise room, it really annoyed me that guys from all over the bank would come downstairs to the basement and use the men's room. And this men's room was really nice. I mean, it was this was a headquarters for the bank, so they spared no expense. And it was an interruption in our work, hearing the elevator ding when the door opened and when the door closed. And there are plenty of bathrooms all over the bank. They didn't need to come down to the basement. And so there were multiple sinks in this bathroom, and the sinks were about just a little bit below belt level. So if you're standing there just a little bit below your belt, you kind of bend over to use the sinks. And I thought that most people are lazy, so they tended to use the sink closest to where they were, and so the shortest path would be from walking in to the shortest distance to a specific urinal, then the shortest distance to a sink, and then the shortest distance to the door. So I took off the aerator that was on the sink, and I just fabricated it so it would spray a real fine mist straight out, kind of like a squirt gun, straight out, at just below belt level. And the coolest thing was a guy would walk in, 2 minutes later you'd hear, "Oh!"
Oh, God.
Well, and the problem was, we all wore suits back then, and not everybody wore a black suit. Some wore tan, light gray, and these water spots would really show up.
Yeah,
so now
it wouldn't look very appropriate either if you had to go to the cafeteria.
So what happened was these guys who would, race across, from wherever they were to use our men's room. It took extra time because we were way out of the way. So that took extra time. They had to get back to wherever their workstation was. But now we added like another 10 minutes while they dried their pants off. So we actually stemmed the tide of these foreigners, if you will, invading our bathroom. There are things that you can do that are practical and probably fun for some people, maybe less fun for other people. So I shared a couple of those with our class. True stories. Yet, you want to hear another one?
Do you mind if I tell you one?
Yeah, go ahead.
I used to work for the post office. That was back in the 70s, and I was what they called a sub. And they had a lot of World War II and Korean veterans at the time, so these men were hanging on to the jobs. They were doing it 20, 25, 30 years. We even had one youngster, so to speak. He'd been on this. He had been working since 1933, and here it was like 1978, 79, and he's there. He's got the best route, and I'll tell you, the guy was in his. I swear, he must have been in his early 80s, but he was still doing a route. But it was in Boston, and anyway. You'd hear stories, especially when the older gentlemen would talk. I used to love to listen to their stories, and they would be all laughing and all amongst each other. Well, one day, the story came out like they ran a tight ship, but every once in a while, something would come up that, let's just say, the postal inspectors and the supervisors would miss. So there was certain sections of Boston that, let's just say, they're kind of like the run down, the poor sections, but the type of sections too where it might not be that safe to go into, much of the day. Well, anyway, they had a guy who was assigned to that route. So what he used to do was he'd take the meal and he'd figure all these people want are the first class meal, which has the 40 cents. Well, at the time it had the stamp on it, or the checks. He said they didn't want the junk mail, they didn't want the flyers, they didn't want this. They just wanted the first class and the checks. So what he would do is that how the sewer drains would be there, and you'd see it. It would look like a small tunnel almost with the grate in front of it. Mm-hmm. And he would sit there at the beginning of his route and just basically fling in letter after letter. Circular, right? Well, this went on for some months. Well, one day, they had a storm that, let's just say it was torrential downpour. He says, the next thing everybody knew, floating down the street, covering the entire street, were all this mail that the guy had been throwing down in the store. It must have backed up so bad. So when the postal inspectors finally caught up with this guy, he said, look, all they wanted was the checks from the first class mail. Well, he needed to find underemployment after that, but I'm just saying, that's a true story.
That's a great story. And, we have heard stories about post office employees throwing out the mail, and, that's a great story. So I was, in the 1990s, early 1990s, I was teaching high school students advanced computer technology, and one of the things that we did was we built computers, and we would install networks. We would design networks of computers and the wiring and every component, printers, software, every component from the beginning to teaching the teachers how to use computers. So we did that, and my classroom did. And at one time I had 60 students, but I was able to whittle that down to about 15 students. And we sold a network to another school district on the other side of Virginia. So it was a couple-hour drive. And so we got the school systems, the district's vans, and I took my students on a field trip to install these computers. And as a treat, I took them to Fuddruckers, which is a hamburger joint. Have you heard of Fuddruckers?
Yeah, no, I have.
Yeah, okay. So this was back in the 90s. So we pulled into Fuddruckers, and the parking lot was full. I thought, well, this is going to be, boy, we don't have a lot of time to, wait an hour. But I'll tell you the rest of the story when we come back. True story coming up about my class, Fuddruckers, and what I did. George is with us in New Hampshire. We're telling stories. George in New Hampshire and I are ending our broadcast careers here this morning. And so I was telling a story about Fuddruckers, and my students who were on a field trip to install computers. But first I need to preface this with a little more information. Back in the 1980s, I learned about a management style that General Electric used, and it's called MBWA. MBWA. 4 letters. And it stands for managing by walking around. Managing by walking around. And so what the boss would do in the General Electric management style, and the little people didn't know this, the boss would go out onto the floor where the little people were doing their jobs, whether it be a factory or an office setting, and he'd take out a pad and a pen. And he'd kind of stand in one place, kind of in the middle, and he'd look to the left, and he'd write down romaine lettuce. And he'd look a little bit to the right, and he'd write apples. And he'd look a little to the right some more, and he'd say olive oil, potatoes. So he's making a list, because he remembered his wife called him and said, don't forget, on the way home, get these things. So he's writing this list. But now the little people are looking at the boss, who's got a real stern, serious look on his face. He's got the pad, and he's writing down, he's looking at them. And they're saying, he knows. He knows. He knows that I messed up. I'm going to get fired today. So the little people know of all their little mistakes. They see the boss writing things down, stern look on his face, and then the boss leaves. So that's MBWA, and it really straightens up, any slackers that might be in the area. They see this and they think, oh, I'm next. I'm going to get fired next. Okay, now keep that in mind. So we're in Fuddruckers, and the line is really long. It's snaking around, and I'm thinking, it's going to be an hour before we get served. I can't spend this time because I've got to get these students back so they can get back on the bus and go home. Back at the school after our day's adventure installing these computers. I've got to get them home. So I had a deadline. So my uniform was always the same, and it still is the same. It hasn't changed. It's a long-sleeved, typically white shirt, broadcloth, ironed, with a tie. And back then it was khaki slacks. And if it was the winter, it would be a World War II style brown leather bomber jacket. In the summer, it would be no bomber jacket. So that was my uniform. Long sleeve white shirt, khaki slacks, and a tie. So we're in there, and my students are with me, and the line is really long, and we're at the end of the line. So I said to one of my students, can you go back to the van and get my clipboard? And this was like a clipboard that would hold 8.5 by 11 paper. So he got my clipboard, and I kind of wandered toward the front of the line. I brought one of my students with me, actually a couple of them. I said, come with me. And be serious. No joking. You got to look real serious. So I said, and we're standing near the front of the line, but out of the way, but where the employees could hear us, the people behind the counter. And there was a gal taking pre-orders, from this long line. And I said to one of my students, now listen, don't say anything about us being from corporate headquarters. And don't say anything about, us timing, how long this line is, okay? Don't say anything. And so it was okay. So we got back in line. And do you know, they called us right away? Just because they had this little seed planted that we were from Fuddruckers corporate headquarters, and we were going to report on how well we were served. And then we got the best service there that day. So that was just one more little ruse that we pulled, and the students had some fun with that. So they learned
a story. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I have a story. I worked as a bricklayer's assistant when I was right out of high school. And I think it's kind of in the blood vein, you know what I mean? You look at all those Roman aqueducts and the buildings that are the roads that are still in use. You know, it's kind of in the blood building that. My father used to joke when he first married my mother. You know, she was Italian. She's Italian, and it's like your mom. And it was like the toaster broke down, and my mother fixed it. My father always laughed. He goes, "It's the blood," you know. But I got a story along a restaurant line that I think you'll get a kick out of.
All right, when we come back, George in New Hampshire is with us. This is USA Prepares. Kind of a light day today. We're seeing if we can get fired from our broadcasting careers by telling true stories. We'll be right back. We haven't done this class before, and we're just having a little bit of fun here at USA Prepares. Light day. George and I are just telling stories, true stories, and we're going to tell some more. George, during the last hour, you were telling us the beginning of a story. Please continue.
Yeah, I work with an old-time Italian stonemason, and for a while, and I liked him. Nice man. His name was Dominic. And I remember he told me this story. He says he was traveling down towards New Jersey. He was on the road, and he said he decided he wanted to stop at a nice Italian restaurant many years ago. So he saw one on the side of the road. He pulled over. Well, he went in. He says as soon as they sat him down, they couldn't do enough for him. He says they lit his cigar. They brought him whatever he wanted. He goes, he couldn't believe the service. He just could not believe the service. So at the end of the meal, you know, as he's getting up to pay, you know, he goes up and he says to the girl at the head desk, he says, you know, I just want to say, he goes, this has been the most pleasurable experience of my life in a restaurant. I really, really want to thank you for it. He goes, I really felt you treated me like I was very special. And, well, the girl looked at him quizzically and said, well, Mr. So-and-so. She said another name. She goes, well, after all, you own this restaurant and a chain of restaurants, you know, in New Jersey. And she pointed to a photograph on the wall. And he said he looked at the photograph. It was the split image. If he was an identical twin, that was
it. Great story. To put an exclamation point on that, my son typically dresses when he's conducting business. He will dress in a suit, which is kind of unusual for our neck of the woods. And he happened to be in Springfield at a large restaurant chain. And so he walked in, and they immediately, you know, the manager came over, thanks so much for coming, greeted him, treated him like royalty. And so he was seated, seems like before everybody else, and he got his meal, and he went to pay for it, and they said, no, it's on us. We take care of you people. They thought my son was in the FBI.
Oh, boy.
True story. But I have a feeling that's because he had a holster. You know, he wasn't brandishing, he wasn't flashing. He just had this holster on, and it was the 15-degree FBI cant. You know, the angle that they use, and it was you know, he had his suit and he had his holster and he had his 1911 on the side, and it was, you know, in good condition. He didn't look sloppy. He looked neat and trim, and, you know, haircut, and, you know, all the things that you would expect a member of one of those agencies to look like if they weren't undercover. Okay? That's what he looked like. And so he didn't understand what was going on, but they did very much the same thing. Bought him his meal and so forth. But true story.
I have an anecdote along the FBI that I think you'd like, if you don't mind my saying it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, you know G. Gordon Liddy, right?
Oh, sure. He's the guy that said, well, if you're on an airplane make sure you bring sharp pencils with you in case you have to stab somebody through the neck. Yeah, that's
right. He's a bit of a practical joker, too, though. He's a tough man, but he's a funny man. He's actually, I'd say, a rather sensitive man. His mother's Italian, his father, I don't know. But I'm just saying, again, you get that strain. I can't help it. Forgive me for getting into that bloodline. But he had this anecdote one time. He goes, now, when he joined the agency, he said that every agent had to have a personal interview with the head man, J. Edgar Hoover. And so he was ushered into the inner office. There's J. Edgar Hoover across the desk. Well, for some reason or other, I don't know how it came up or whether something had happened that day. He says J. Edgar Hoover was in a particularly foul mood that day. And he said most of the interview consisted of a rant by J. Edgar Hoover about Eleanor Roosevelt, who he could not abide. And she must have been doing something or done something that, really stuck in his craw, because he goes, for the next 45 minutes to an hour, he would go back and forth saying different things about Eleanor Roosevelt this, Eleanor Roosevelt that, and G. Gordon Liddy was just sitting there like in silence, just listening raptly. So he goes, when he gets out of the interview, he goes outside. He goes, well, the FBI agents in the office there can't believe J. Edgar Hoover spent that much time with a novice FBI agent. And they said, wow. He goes, usually he has him in there for less than 5 minutes, 10 maximum. He goes, what did you say? What did you say to him that really got his attention and everything else? You would tell us, please. We want to know, because they're all wanting to get close to him in terms of, just really be on his good side and everything like that. So he says, well, I'll tell you, I guess one of his favorite subjects is Eleanor Roosevelt. Or the way he put it in such a way, in other words, well, you should talk to him about Eleanor Roosevelt. He really likes her, or something like that. He walks right out of the office.
Good story. Along that same line, I was an elected member of the Republican Party at one time, no longer. And what I did, and Mrs. Finelli did it with me, we waited till the last minute of the last hour of the last day to run for office as committee people in our little hamlet. And there were no committee people who were interested in that job. So, and it's a zero-pay job. You don't get paid for it. It's just, it's a position within the Republican Party. And I thought, I'd like to learn more about these Republicans, and I'd like to learn more from the inside. So let's go look at the inside, and we'll become Republican committee people. So because we were unopposed, we were selected. And so put that aside. Now, I have a friend who is a staunch Democrat in our neck of the woods, and he is really, really big in the Democrat Party. And he owns a restaurant, and he decided that he was going to have his meeting at the restaurant with the Democrats. And for some reason, he liked me. And he said, hey, Vinny, we've got this meeting coming up. We've got this guy, he's running for political office. He's real big. If you can, you need to come to this meeting. I said, okay. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough because I'm broadcasting in Springfield, and it's going to take about an hour to get there. And I'll do my very best to be there. Well, when I broadcast, I wear my uniform. Typically a blazer, solid color blazer, white shirt, tie, khaki slacks, that kind of a thing. And so I raced from the broadcast in Springfield, Missouri to his restaurant. I got there just a couple minutes later than I wanted to be there. There were already people in the restaurant. And this was a private meeting, so the restaurant was closed to everybody. But there were a whole bunch of people there. And when I walked in, I was looking forward to meeting the featured speaker, whoever he was. He was running for office. And so it was a big deal. Well, what happened next was they ran around these, they rearranged the table so they're in a great big square so everybody could see everybody. And most people had ordered before me because I got there after they got there. And I gave my request for dinner, and it was a Dutch treat kind of a thing. And I was really shocked that my meal came out darn close to first. But I hadn't been the first to order. I thought, that's kind of strange. So I said to the waitress, what happened? Why are you serving me before other people who ordered before me? And she said, well, you're the featured speaker. So another case of mistaken identity. They thought that I was this Democrat who was going to be speaking to the group. And they wanted to serve me first so that I could eat and be done, and everybody else could finish eating, while I was speaking. And I thought, this is a great opportunity. Do I want to do this? And I could have gotten up and said, you know what? Our party's in shambles. We need to stop lying and cheating and obfuscating. We need to be more like the Republicans. But I didn't do it. And I kind of regret not doing that, because that would have been one of those fun things that you could remember doing. That would be really, really kind of fun. Right. But I didn't do that. Just another story of mistaken identity.
May we just take this aside for a moment? There was something you triggered earlier in the week about the way people repair things nowadays.
Sure.
Like automotive. Well, yeah. I'll tell you, I went into one place that, let's just say it's synonymous with being a dignitary of some importance. Okay, that's all I'll say on that. But okay, I hear the music now. So.
Yep. So we're going to talk about auto repair when we come back.
Yeah.
George is with us. I'm Vince Finelli, and I guess our ratings are probably close to the bottom today. Actually, they're not. Actually, George, it's kind of amazing. Our ratings are really good. Isn't that amazing? Just telling the truth, sharing stories. We'll be right back. George became an instructor at USA Preparis because he called in and he shared information with us. He's got a wealth of information, lots of experience. And he would call in and ask questions and share information. And I invited him to become an instructor. And that can happen with you as well. So if you have information that you'd like to share, and it's real and it's true and you're honest, you may be able to join the faculty as well. Now, please don't think you're going to get paid, because nobody gets paid around here, not even me. So just a thought. George, please continue retelling us the story.
Yeah, you and I both know increasingly that it seems as though there seems to be a lack of fundamental understanding or even common sense. And also there seems to be a lack in honorableness and honesty in many instances now, where the dollar comes before all else, even personal safety of the people that you may be doing business with or whatnot. In other words, if somebody can sell you an inferior product, even a defective product, and make a buck out of it, in other words, the bottom line is what counts in many quarters these days. I mean, it was like that many years ago, too, but I think they were held back with a little fear of divine retribution, so to speak. Not always. Anyway, I had a friend who had a tow yard. My family had been doing business with him many, many years down in Massachusetts. So I pulled in. I was looking for some tires for my car. And, he had a beautiful set of tires, all matched, good name. So I took him back with me, and I'm not blaming him, because he'll tow cars sometimes. He'll get cars that come in, he'll strip it for certain parts, tires, whatnot, and he sells a little cottage industry on the side. So anyway, I get them up here, so I said, okay, I decided, let me wear out what I've got on a little bit more, and I've got these held in abeyance for a few months. Well, I went in to have them mounted. The first place told me, and they're pretty honest, but they told me, they said, look, we don't know, but these look like they might be slightly oversized. We're not sure. You might get by with them, but then again, you might not. I said, all right. So not to be undaunted, I went on and I went to this other place that's a chain, and all the old crew that I knew there is gone. And the new guy who was there, he looked at the tires. He goes, these tires are 16 years old. He goes, we can't put them on the car. So I said, wait a minute now. I said, look at them. There's no cracks. They look almost brand new. I said, so the guy says, well, you know, I said, look, I have one tire that's not too good on the back. I said, can you just patch it for me or whatnot, and then I'll be on my way. So he wanted to sell me a new tire. So I said, well, that's okay. So anyway, long story short, I'm recommended to another guy. I go to him. Now, the guy's been in many business. It looks like he inherited it from father. The old man, by all accounts, was straight as an arrow. Well, he puts the tires on, but you know how tires can get what they call flat spotted?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And I mean, I hadn't run into this before, but in other words, I guess the car might have been sitting with the tires in the same position for years, and maybe my friend just told it. He didn't even realize he had them in the back of this big rider truck he had anyway. So, long story short, this guy puts it on. As soon as I start driving, I feel the thing shimmy, and I wasn't doing it before, so I go back halfway. Well, it turned out he had set the emergency brake. Somehow it got stuck, and the drum was red hot. So it's a good thing I went back. So they said, well, maybe it just needs some more balance. And so all he did was he freed up the brake. He goes, well, I'm not going to charge you. He sent me on my way. Well, it wasn't as bad, but it was still shimming, and like you couldn't drive over 35 miles an hour on it. And so, anyway, long story short, I decided, wait a minute, something's wrong here. I said, so I went back to this other place. The place told me, and they said, I called up, dropped it off. My friend and I went on a trip, came back. They said, no, I called, and then they said, well, you know, you're going to need tire rods and a bearing. I said, okay, what's it going to be, $350? I said, look, I wasn't prepared to spend that much, and besides, 4 days ago, it wasn't doing this. I said it was smooth. So they said, well, we'll take the tires off and we'll make sure they're balanced appropriately. Well, long story short, I guess these things were so flat spotted. My regular mechanic doesn't do tires, so it was so flat spotted. He says, Judge, when that was on the balancing machine, he said that thing must have been flopping all over the place. He goes, I'm a little surprised. So then
absolutely.
He checked it out for me, and he just told me. He says, listen, you don't need tire rods, you don't need a bearing. He says it's the tires.
George and I are telling stories. George in New Hampshire. George, we were talking about tires. You bought some tires that had been setting and developed a flat spot after setting for a while, and you got the shimmy and shaking in your vehicle, and you were told that you needed tie rod end or ends and some bearings. Please continue.
Well, the other thing I just realized, during the intermission, I was told that the tires were 16 years old in one place, and then the next place I went, I was told they were 7 years old. Now, I'm just saying is that, you know, as we see things unraveling, where, you know, the shortcuts, the poor workmanship, the lack of accountability, the lack of honorability, and I see it, and I can see the clear delineation where, you know, in other words, my uncle used to say, he says, you know, a lot of these crooked mechanic outfits, there's some good ones out there. He said they pray for old people and women to come in because most of the time they can prey on them and they can play on their fears or their gullibility or their just naivete. And, I mean, my mechanic looked at it who doesn't work on tires, and he told me, Judge, they out and out lied to you. And I knew that, you know, and when he confirmed that, but I said to myself, they would have had me lined up where They would have replaced parts that didn't need it. They'd charge me the better part of $500 to do it. It wouldn't have fixed the problem. And then at the end of it, they had me lined up so that I'd buy a whole set of new tires, which they had another thing coming if they thought I would, but they played the angle. Now, needless to say, I'm going to complain to corporate on one level there. But on the other one, the other individual, I was recommended by a mutual friend, and he burnt out a connection before it was really even had a time to set. And like I say, you avoid a lot of that, Vinny, because I know you do much, if not most, of your own work.
Right, we do. Okay, let me add an exclamation point to what you just said. So one of our instructors and friends lives in the Springfield Village. And he called me up and he said, hey, I just want to run something by you. He said his wife was traveling with their SUV. It's an American-made SUV. And there was a small puddle, very small, a small leak, looked like oil underneath where the engine is on this SUV. So she took it to the dealership, and the dealership said, this is pretty serious. This is a serious leak. And I'm paraphrasing. What you've got is a defective hydro boost. HYDRO space BOOST. What this is, it's a device developed, I believe, by Bendix Corporation, and it replaces the vacuum diaphragm assembly that would add power to the conventional braking system. So we used to have hydraulic brakes, and you have this large, round device that's right against the firewall, right next to the
master cylinder.
Master cylinder, right.
Yeah.
And that was a vacuum-operated device, and it was the brake booster. Well, the Hydro Boost goes right there, and it replaces that. So if you don't have room for this big can for the vacuum one, you can run one of these Hydro Boosts off the power steering pump. So you use the hydraulic pressure from the power steering pump to run the power steering as well as the power brakes. Well, there's a little seep, and it's really common for General Motors vehicles to have a leak over time. So you have 100,000+ miles on the vehicle, which is really nothing today. They tend to develop this leak. And so his wife brought the vehicle to the dealer. They said, wow, it's pretty serious, this leak, and it's $1,300. But the good news is we can do it today. So he called me and he said, what do you think? And I said, hold on. I've never had a problem with one. Let me look it up. So I looked it up while I was on the phone. I said, I found the part on the internet for $7.99 to rebuild it. It looks like it's going to take 45 minutes to take it apart and rebuild it. But, if we do it, it'll probably take a couple hours. So, tell you what, how about this? Here's an option. There's 3 options. One, you can have it fixed at the dealership and be done with it today for $1,300. We can buy a rebuilt unit, and it's about between $200 and $300, depending on which model you have, and I can't tell which one yours is. There's a rod that is one of 2 different lengths, and depending on that rod length, when we take it out, we'll know. It's either $2 or $300, rough numbers. Actually, probably more like in the 100, maybe 150 to 250. I said, or third option, we can buy the seal, and there's one seal in this Hydro Boost, and we can put it in ourselves, and it's $7.99 on the internet, and we can buy that, and we'll have it in a couple days. And why don't you come on over, and on the weekend, and we'll put it in. Now, I don't want you to think we've done it before, but I know that you and I can do this. It'll be fun. And so he said, I'll call you back. Call me back, and he said, I like that $7.99 option. I said, okay, I'll order it for you. So I ordered the part. He came by, and we worked on it. And we had a really tough time putting that seal in, because the seal was old stock from eBay, and it shrunk. It shrunk, I don't know, maybe 30 thousandths of an inch, and we could not get it in without damaging it. Ultimately, we damaged it. So we went to the local auto parts store, and for the $250 neighborhood, we got a rebuilt unit, and it didn't work right, and it was defective. So we said, tell you what, why don't you leave the vehicle? We'll see if we can get one locally in Springfield. We'll go out there and pick one up, and we'll rebuild it, and we'll put it back in. So we did that, and it was a little more expensive. It might have been $12 or $13. We put the part in. It was not new old stock, and it worked great. So the point is, for 1% of what the dealer wanted $1,300. We spent $13 for the seal. We fixed it. Now, I said to my friend / instructor when he was on the phone the first time, I said, why don't you, when you call the dealer, ask them specifically what they would replace and what the part number is. And the gal who was at the service counter at this dealership told him, I don't have the part number. I don't know what it is. I can't tell you. Which is absolute nonsense. Because if she says, yeah, this is a real serious thing, you've got this leak in the Hydro Boost, she absolutely knows what the part number is. And for her to come up with a $1,300 repair, of which half of it was labor, she had to know what the part was.
She'd have a hard time justifying it when it was cross-referenced.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Like I say, Vincent, it's like I heard with the flat spots, I did a little research, that if you put about 150 miles on the car, I notice it seems to be slowly smoothing out. So I'm going to take my chances as it is. I don't go too far. So in other words, but it looks like this might have a little pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, so to speak. But my God, I'll tell you, I mean, they can't read a tire sidewall for the age. They can't see an obvious defect. They lie to make money, and then they're going to be written off the list. And also, this story will be circulated among my friends and family. And let's just say, instead of just doing the right thing, they would have had a customer that would have continued to come back, and word of mouth, especially in a small town, goes a very long way.
Yeah, and they say something like this. These are rough numbers, but if you have a good experience, you might tell one person or two. If you have a bad experience, you're probably going to tell 11. And it's absolutely true. So what'd you guys do for dinner? Oh, we went to the ABC restaurant. Really? How was it? It was terrible. Really? What happened? And then that person will say to their friends, well, hey, listen, I just talked to Vinny, and he said, well, it's a terrible place. Here's what he said. And then that story, gets legs, and it travels. So I don't know why people can't just tell the truth and do the right thing. But, I said to our instructor, I said, by the way, is that dealership next to the Mercedes dealership in Springfield? He said, as a matter of fact, it is. And so I don't go to the Mercedes dealership for anything, and here's why. Because one day, we have several old Mercedes. I mean, old. And one of them had a hydraulic leak. And what happened with this hydraulic leak was the shock absorbers on all four corners of this particular Mercedes run on a hydraulic pump. So it tries to figure out how to level out the car. So if the right front corner is low, no problem, it'll pump up some hydraulic fluid and jack up the right front corner, make the car level for the pleasure of the passengers.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. Well, it failed, and the nose of the car went really, really low. It was not drivable. So that's okay. I have a tow dolly. Why do I have a tow dolly? Because I need one, because our cars break down a lot. And so a tow dolly is, you drive the vehicle front or rear wheels, depending on what the vehicle is, on this tow dolly. The tow dolly has two wheels. You strap down the wheels with these nylon straps. It hooks up to a trailer hitch, and you can pull the vehicle. So I called the Mercedes dealer in Springfield, and I said, okay, I've got this particular make and model, and I'm having a lot of trouble figuring out how to lock the steering wheel. I can't lock the steering wheel. Normally, when you take the key out of the ignition, the steering wheel locks right there. So what you'd want to do with a tow dolly is have the front wheels facing absolutely straight ahead, take the key out of the ignition, and the steering wheel will lock. Then you can drive away with the vehicle strapped on the tow dolly. Well, I couldn't get a straight answer as to how to lock the front wheels in the straight ahead position from the service manager. Kept giving me the runaround. I was standing in the mud and the rain trying to get this done on our dirt road, and I was really wrestling with this, and I couldn't get a straight answer. And what I'm telling you is the guy didn't know. He didn't know, and he was not willing to ask the service manager.
That would have been the most appropriate thing.
Class, George and I have been telling stories for almost 2 hours today, and it's been a lot of fun. George, you mentioned tire date codes, and I'd like to share this with our class. There are 4 digits on the sidewall of the tire. There are DOT codes, and DOT stands for Department of Transportation. So, for example, the last 4 digits of the DOT code are for the date that the tire was manufactured. So, for example, if the tire were to be date coded or DOT code 0203, that means that the tire was manufactured the second week of the year 2003. So 0203. 02 means the second week, and 03 means the year 2003. Now, the problem is that tires manufactured prior to the year 2000 were 3-digit date coded. And it's hard to tell what year you're talking about or what decade you're talking about. So one that ends in the number 9 could be 99 or 89 or 79, So that may be part of the reason for the confusion. It also may be that the people reading the date code didn't understand exactly how the date code works. But class, you can look it up on the internet. You can just look up tire date code, and it'll tell you that.
Do you mind my asking you, Vincent? Sorry to interrupt you. I'll just say,
sure.
How much more time do we have for the broadcast, roughly?
About 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay.
Mm-hmm. That story?
No, I was curious. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So,
no. Go ahead.
I've got a story, but I'm really reluctant to tell it. Well, I'll tell it. So, in the 1980s, Mrs. Finelli and I moved to California to start a company manufacturing satellite communications receivers. And we would work day and night, 7 days a week. It didn't matter whether it was a weekend or not, we worked. And we were building our company and designing this technology. And so one Sunday night, we came back late from work, and we were living in an apartment at the time because we didn't know if we were going to like California. And we didn't know where we were going to, if we were going to buy a house, where it would be. And we had sticker shock because houses were really expensive there compared to the East Coast. So anyway, I couldn't find a parking space, and I parked in the back by the dumpsters and walked to our apartment. Next morning, going into work, my car was gone. So I went to the front office, and they said, yeah, we heard something about the car being towed. Maybe that was it. So I got the number of the towing company, and I called them up, and they said, yeah, it's in, and I'm paraphrasing, it's in East San Jose. So, okay, so I went there, and it wasn't there. They said, well, it's probably in West San Jose. So I went there. Now, this is cross-town, rush hour traffic. It took a long time to get there. South San Jose. So I finally... And this guy that I kept calling, where's my car? I called him and I said, all right, I've been to 3 of your locations. I don't have my car. Now, I just want you to know I know where you are. And if you don't tell me where my car is right now, I'm going to drive the car I'm in right through your front window. And he was kind of taken aback by this. This is back in the 1980s when you could do things like that without being arrested. So, or at least say things like that. And he said, I don't know. The boss knows. And I said, well, ask the boss. He said, well, he's not here. I said, well, do you have a way of contacting him? He said, no. I said, well, if your building were on fire right now, would you be able to contact him? He said, yeah. I said, okay, well, I'm going to call you back in 2 minutes, and I need to know where my car is, or I'm coming. And finally, he said, call me back, and he told me where it was. And I went there, and there was my car. The boss was there, and it was in a concertina wire, chain link fence. And the boss said, $60, cash. And I didn't have cash. I did that much. So I said to him, okay, well, let me go in my car and get my briefcase. Went to my car, got my briefcase, and I opened it right in front of him. And there was a Browning semi-automatic pistol. I said, now who do you want me to make this check out to?
It
happened to be pistol.
Movie, though.
It happened to be pistol.
That in a movie later in the 90s, around that time. I'll Be Back.
Yeah, true story. True story. It happened to be pistol competition night at my wife's company where they had an indoor range, and I just happened to have that Browning.
Extending it, so you had to pay storage fees.
Yeah. Hey, George, have a great weekend. Thanks so much for being with us.
Okay, you too, buddy. All right.
See ya. Bye-bye.